Thank y'all. Man, I tell you, I'm really excited to hear everything y'all had to say in this last hour and a half. I've submitted a lot of things to Bloomfire in the past. I've been using Bloomfire for the last 7 years, since 2010, with 2 different companies. I'm actually managing the community for the company I used to work for still. So I have a lot of insights into some things that have happened. So I've been asked to speak about documentation. We could choose a lot of different things to talk about, but I'm going to be talking a little bit about documentation and how I've been able to get people to use it and things like that. Now, you probably heard a little bit about my bio. I'm a technologist. I manage information technology workers. I've managed thousands of people over the last 30 years, hundreds of millions of dollars of projects. But there's been some overwhelming problems I've had. First thing is, yeah, I have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in computer science, but I also have a BA in English. And I taught public high school, English, mathematics, and computer science. And my staff have kind of described me as that weird-looking fish you see in the aquarium that everybody stares at, because I actually care about documentation when it comes to technological things, and most technologists really, really don't care about it at all. And so I've had to train people over the years about what makes good documentation, and that's some of the things I'm going to talk about today. All right. I guess before we get to what good documentation is, we have to discuss why it matters. Why does good documentation matter, and what does it mean to have good documentation? And notice when I say good documentation, I'm not talking about the best documentation, right? Because some of us are overachievers and we like to kind of push things right to the top, but I'm not really even talking about that. I'm talking about something that might be what we might call is sufficient documentation. If we can have something as sufficient, we might actually call that good. But in my field of work, what most people like to say is they don't have the time to do any documentation. And frankly, at times, I'd be happy just to get any documentation at all. And I work mostly today with network engineers and architects and phone technicians. And I love it because what they'll like to tell me, or the excuse is, I don't have time to create documentation, which I really don't find necessarily to be true. What I find is they actually hate the process of doing documentation, and therefore they don't make the time. And the two kind of feed off each other in many ways. Now, I have a staff of about 50 people. We work between 185 locations. I work for the University of Texas, by the way. No, not the one in Austin. If you don't know anything about the University of Texas, we have 17 campuses around the state of Texas, and I work for the one in Houston, which is a health science center. We got 6 academic colleges in medicine, School of Medicine, School of Public Health, School of Nursing, Dental School. But we also now, due to changes in the Affordable Care Act, some of you know that as Obamacare, we now actually have 2,600 physicians that work for the University of Texas in Houston, and we have 185 clinics. Most of that we've stood up in the last 10 years. And we have over 60,000 devices we're trying to manage with a staff of about 50 people. So let's just say that I will agree with all my staff that we are very busy people. The question is, are we too busy to create documentation? And then, of course, then to say, well, can we create something that's just better than the average amount of documentation? But we have to define a little bit about what good means. So I'm going to show you an example from what my guys used to do. When I asked for a piece of documentation about LBJ Hospital, which is one of the primary care hospitals in Houston, I asked the guys, I said, tell me a little bit about this. And this was when I was coming on board with this team 3 years ago. And this is what I got. I got a Visio diagram. And it's only about a quarter of it, actually. And I looked at it and said, you know, do you think that's good? And one of the network architects, one of these guys at the very top of my chain in my organization said, oh, yeah, you're not going to get anything better than that. Because that's it, man. I said, well, I'll tell you something. I'm looking at this, and there are a whole lot of questions I have, right? Because you know what it is, but can you tell me the story? And then after I got the story 30 minutes later, I knew a lot more about what this actually represented. Because this image, this flat piece of information, didn't tell me anything about the hospital. I got a fleet of 10 vehicles, right? If someone's coming into my organization and they're going to LBJ Hospital, where are they going to put this vehicle? I don't own the building, right? I have equipment in the building. So who am I going to contact if I get there? Where do I get the key? You know, okay, what is this equipment? What's the warranty schedule on that equipment? What's the serial number? What kind of UPS are you using? Do you know who to contact if something like this happens? And so I kind of drove them through this process saying, is that good enough? And what we find is that people tend to put their idea of documentation into their own context, right? It's good enough for me, therefore that's good enough for everybody. And what I had to start breaking down with the staff is, what's maybe good enough for you may not be good enough for everybody else, right? We have to come somewhere between, very good and acceptable, and then the stuff that's really at the top end of the chain. So I had to start, when we had this conversation, by the way, it was kind of funny because I felt like a Martian talking to fungi, because I'm trying to get them to see the big picture of everything, and they're down in their own little world, and you just almost have like a baseball bat, have to kind of get them out of their, what I'd like to call a bad habit of thinking that the world of documentation and information revolves around my own view of it, my own need for it. And what you have to start doing with people who are like the people that I manage is kind of break them out of the habit and say, don't think about you. Why don't you think about someone else? Or better yet, think about the person who's not you, or the person who comes after you, is just even better, which is a couple of things that I like to drive with the staff are these two concepts here, which Bloomfire has been really good at helping out in my particular case. And one is information survivability. And that's basically the concept that, hey, you're important, but if you leave, I still need to know what you know, right? Because if you leave the organization, I still have to support the same stuff. You don't get to take that stuff with you that you manage. I get to keep that. And I want to know what you have. I want to know what you know, right? So good documentation means that I've done that. I've actually survived that information past whatever the circumstance may be where someone's no longer in the organization. I was showing someone an article the other day, and I wish I could pull up some of these articles so you could see, but something became very clear because we were looking at one of those maps you saw. But in this case, it was for a wireless network at a particular place. And imagine we have this courtyard out here, right? It was the exact same situation, but the person noticed on this, what we call a heat map, does the wireless signal cover there, and does it cover there, and does it cover there? Well, we have images in this article of the wireless heat map and the coverage map. And sure enough, there's a courtyard there, and the person noticed from the map that there was no extension of the wireless signal past the glass, right? But other articles, you'll see that wireless signal travels right through the glass. Well, why is that? The person they're going, I don't understand. Well, we did a lot of research and found out that the glass they use in that building, it prevents all wireless signals from going through it. And that's why the heat map showed it. We made some notes in the article. Hey, if you're trying to if somebody calls and asks, why can't I get a wireless signal out in the courtyard at this particular building? Well, that's why. And of course, now we're trying to put a wireless antenna outside in that particular place. But that's what good documentation can do. It can reveal things you didn't know if you have the right people doing the right things. We also had this really bad situation goes about 6 months ago, where we actually had a fiber cut that went to a psychiatric hospital. And, in my business, when a fiber gets cut, things go down. I don't know about y'all, but it's a very bad thing. And we always try to plan. We have backups for these kinds of things, but they're never as good as the primary thing you'd like to use. And fiber is really important in my business. And so when fiber gets cut, people run. People just jump into action. And what was really awesome is, even though the person who managed the project of putting the fiber in, and this is about 18 miles worth of fiber, it goes up streets and down streets and across bridges and across a bio and all this kind of stuff. When people got on site, you know what they all did? They broke out their phone, got into their Bloomfire app, and they immediately started getting access to the information about where the fiber was run, because the person who used to have that information no longer works for us. But in that emergency situation, we were able to have the survivability of the information right there on hand. And the second thing is this idea of democratization of information. Now, the people that I manage right now, we have about 8 different categories of workers, but there's a natural progression. I got people who are kind of the low end, all the way up to these network architects. These are pretty fancy people with a lot of education, and they do some pretty important work, and thankfully for them, they make pretty good money. And everybody likes to be there, right? like to be at the place where you're making lots of money and you're well respected and you do good work and it's lots of fun. But how do you get someone there? And, you know, as people, we are normally not very good at sharing information. Kind of goes against our nature in many ways, right? Because if I'm trying to protect myself, then I tend to hoard information. It's just part of our nature, and I find that very true in technology workers typically is that, you know, they're afraid that if they share something, that they may not be the person who's more important than someone else. And so you have to kind of break that down a little bit. And I tell folks that, what does it matter to you in the organization? You know, if you're the best thing at whatever this categorization of work is, that you might share that with the person who would like to be you someday, right? You're like their mentor. You know, they want to be you. So take hold of that, enjoy that, and then use a tool like Bloomfire to help democratize the information across everybody. Everybody has exact access to the same thing. It's like you're just kind of taking little bits of your mind and putting it in there for someone else to do. And then I had a situation where one of my workers at the lower scale came and said, I really would like to know that person's job. I said, have you gone into Bloomfire and read everything that person has published? No, I haven't done that. Come back to me when you do that. So, right, a couple weeks later, he comes back and he says, wow, I think I could do that job. I said, I think you could too. Why don't you go talk to that guy a little bit and see if he'll mentor you in that relationship. And maybe one day you will have that job, right? That's how you start. Now, that cost me nothing. Literally, 5 minutes of conversation, problem solved, right? It democratizes the information. Bloomfire has been great about doing that. So how does it work? Try to keep us on schedule, guys. So, have any of you tried to introduce Bloomfire to another part of your organization and it doesn't work? This has been my experience because I'm one department in a large IT organization of many departments, and there have been people who've used other tools. You may know of some of them, but it doesn't work out very well. One of the things that I've learned through trying to get other people to do it is the person who manages the community, it's not a casual affair trying to break old habits where people don't create documentation for whatever the reason is. It's not a casual thing. So we have to find a way to encourage and create better documentation. And that's the tough thing, right? It's one thing to ask people to put something together. It's another thing to ask them to do something that's a little bit above the job sometimes, right? Because a lot of people don't enforce these things. All right. So I've been asked to put together a couple of key takeaways. And, of course, I have to say, first thing, you have to select the right product, right? If you're going to produce documentation, you're going to put it somewhere, you need to put it somewhere, number one, that it's collaborative, right? That it's available to everybody. That's the availability part. And that it's easy to use. One of the problems we've had with some of the other tools, and over the last number of years, I've used SharePoint and a wiki type tool. SharePoint, very non-collaborative, hard to get access to when you're off-site, tons of effort to stand it up. Didn't work very good. And then I've also used a wiki, which I couldn't get anyone to use because the tool was terrible, right? It was awful. I mean, getting someone to actually put together a piece of wiki content was terrible. But Bloomfire has made it extremely easy to format content, to template content, and to make it easy to use and collaborative. And the best part for me, because the people who work for me, we're out in the field every day, it's available all the time. You know, if they've got a PC, it's great. If they've got their iPad, it's great. If they've got their iPhone or Android, it's always available. It's always easy to use. And the next key takeaway is that making, again, good documentation, make it a priority. And so one of the ways that I kind of control that is I don't let projects close until, guess what? The documentation's done, right? I just don't close the project. And then I nag people about it. I don't mean nag. I mean, I encourage people to complete the project for their own sake when the documentation is fully complete. And that's one of the things that I have control as a supervisor. Number two, I use the product myself. Now, like all of you who manage Bloomfire communities, you probably are the top producer, and I was for years. But I'm happy to say I'm no longer the top producer, right? I'm like a bookworm because I read a lot of stuff, but I don't necessarily produce all the content anymore because it's naturally self-sustaining now where I have other people invested in the community as opposed to myself. But I do actually use the product. I provide lots of positive feedback. I love the one where someone talking about being able to actually monetize creation of good content. Oh my gosh, that's a great idea. Bloomfire people, that's tops, man. Because that really does help. I high-five every article that I allow to get published. And I provide comments, every one of them, because I figure even if the documentation may not be to my high level of standardization, at least they did it, right? Because I can have someone else take that article and do some more with it, or maybe and so you have an opportunity. So even if somebody kind of took their best step, but it wasn't everything I'd like, I still high-five it, and then we do some work on it, right? You really have to get people encouraged to kind of do these things. And then I do find that some incentives work. I love the one that was discussed earlier. I have the person who produces the best piece of content each month, I take to lunch, so that really is encouraged because I'm pretty busy, and so they like to have some private time with me. It's on me anyway, so that's even better, right? A free lunch and time with the boss. So I find, and I heard some other things today that I might like to put into work as well. All right, closing slide. I like what Thomas Jefferson said. Information is the currency of democracy, and I just find that it's really important in any organization. I'm speaking for myself here that organizations just work better. They just work better when information is transparent and that it's available and that it's good. Thank y'all.